Whispers of the Ancients, Episode 2, The Kingdom of Kush. Black Pharaohs of the Nile approximately 2500 BCE to 350 CE, before the pyramids became Egypt's eternal signature. Before the Nile was claimed as the realm of only one great kingdom, there stood a land of ebony, mountains, golden sands, and fierce monarchs, a civilization both shadowed and entwined with Egypt's legacy. This is the story of Kush, land of the Black Pharaohs, forge of resilience, pride, and power. Let us journey south of the First Cataract to the forgotten kingdom that once ruled Egypt itself. Segment 1. The birth of Kush, land of gold and granite. Long before recorded history graced its name with fame, the territory now known as Nubia was already pulsing with life. This stretch of fertile land along the Nile, south of Egypt's First Cataract, cradled the genesis of one of Africa's most enduring civilizations, the Kingdom of Kush. Kush was born in the crucible of deserts and riverbanks, a land rich in gold, ebony, ivory, and exotic wildlife. These natural riches did not escape the attention of ancient Egypt to the north, which both admired and feared its southern neighbor. To Egyptians, this land was Toseti, the land of the bow, renowned for its skilled archers and resilient warriors. By around 2500 BCE, early Nubian chiefdoms began consolidating power along the Nile's bends, laying the foundation for a kingdom rooted in trade, craftsmanship, and strategic ingenuity. They established the first capital at Kerma, city of earth and brick temples, palaces, and sacred burial grounds. Here, the Proto-Kushite culture flourished. Kerma's archaeological remains reveal a society that rivaled Egypt in complexity. Its rulers constructed massive humanly burial mounds the size of pyramids, adorned with hundreds of human and animal sacrifices, pottery, and treasures. Far from being a mere Egyptian colony, Kerma was a peer, developing its own artistic, religious, and political identity. Segment 2. Kush and Egypt, rivals, allies. Enemies. The relationship between Egypt and Kush was one of both necessity and rivalry. The Egyptian pharaohs craved the Kushite lands for their wealth, especially gold, and often launched military expeditions deep into Nubian territory. At times, Egypt succeeded in exerting control, establishing garrisons and trade outposts. At other times, Kush rebelled fiercely, asserting its autonomy. During Egypt's Middle Kingdom around 2050 to 1710 BCE, Egypt pushed further into Nubia, seeking to dominate the southern trade routes. But despite periods of occupation, Kushite resilience persisted. The kingdom adapted, absorbing Egyptian technologies, religious symbols, and architectural styles, but always reshaping them into a distinctly Nubian form. When Egypt weakened during the Second Intermediate Period, approximately 1650 to 1550 BCE, Kerma struck back. It launched daring raids into Egyptian territory, even forming alliances with the Hyksos to the north. Kerma's armies burned temples in Upper Egypt and may have sacked Thebes itself. For a moment, the power of the Nile flowed from the south. Segment 3. The rise of Napata, birthplace of the Black Pharaohs. By the 11th century BCE, the center of Kushite power shifted farther south to Napata, near the base of the sacred mountain Jebel Barkal. This site, believed by both Egyptians and Kushites to be the home of Amun, the supreme god, became the spiritual and political heart of the revived Kushite kingdom. Napata's kings built massive temples in honor of Amun and fashioned themselves in the likeness of Egyptian pharaohs, but their skin was darker, their language Nubian, their customs deeply African. These kings were not imitators, but heirs to a shared legacy. They saw themselves as the rightful restorers of Egypt's divine order. Then, in the 8th century BCE, one of Kush's boldest leaders ascended to the throne. Pi, also spelled Pionki, a devout follower of Amun and a shrewd strategist. Pi launched a campaign into a fractured Egypt. Within a few years, he subdued the Delta, humbled rival princes, and took the crown of both lands. He ruled not as a foreign conqueror, but as a divine unifier. The 25th dynasty, known as the Dynasty of the Black Pharaohs, was born. Segment 4. The 25th dynasty, when Kush ruled Egypt. The reign of the Kushite pharaohs over Egypt marked a turning point in Nile Valley history. Pi, and his successors Shabaka, Shebitku, Taharka, and Tantamoni brought stability to a fragmented land. They revitalized temples, supported the priesthood of Amun, and sought to restore the old values of Mat, balance, justice, and divine harmony. Among them, Taharka stands tall in memory. His reign 690 to 664 BCE saw a flowering of culture, architecture, and ambition. He commissioned grand temples in both Thebes and Nubia, fought Assyrian invasions, and sought to unify the spiritual and material worlds of the Nile. In Assyrian records, he was a formidable opponent, remembered as the Taharka of the Bible. Yet the might of Assyria proved overwhelming. By 664 BCE, the Assyrians pushed deep into Egypt, sacking Thebes. The Kushite dynasty withdrew to Napata, their Egyptian chapter closed, but their legacy endured in monuments, in memory, in pride. Segment 5, Napata's golden age between pharaohs and gods. After retreating from Egypt, the Kushite kings refocused their energies on their homeland. Napata, no longer a base for empire building in the north, became the beacon of Nubian culture and religious devotion. The temples of Amun expanded, and with them grew a unique Nubian theology, one that fused Egyptian pantheons with indigenous African spirituality. At Jebel Barkal, massive sandstone temples were carved and adorned with reliefs depicting divine kingship, not only of gods but of the earthly rulers chosen by them. The kings of Kush saw themselves not just as sovereigns, but as sacred vessels of divine will, both protectors and intermediaries. Royal burials shifted to the nearby necropolis of Nuri. Here, a new architectural marvel emerged, the Kushite pyramid. Though influenced by Egyptian prototypes, these Nubian pyramids were steeper, more numerous, and marked a different worldview where kingship, burial, and cosmic harmony converged in the shadow of the holy mountain. Segment 6, the move to Meroe, a new capital for a new era. Sometime around the 6th century BCE, the political center of Kush moved once again, this time to Meroe, farther south near the confluence of the Nile and Atbara rivers. Why the capital shifted remains debated. Perhaps environmental pressures, economic change, or the desire for autonomy from Egyptian influence. Whatever the cause, Meroe marked a renaissance. The Meroitic period, which spanned nearly a millennium, saw the flowering of a distinctly African civilization. Meroe was a city of iron, smoke, and learning. Dense forests nearby supplied charcoal for iron smelting, which became a core industry. Kushite blacksmiths produced weapons, tools, and trade goods, giving Meroe its fame as the Birmingham of Africa. The city's architecture reflected its cosmopolitan identity. There were temples with colonned halls, palaces with grand courtyards, and more than 200 pyramids in nearby necropolises. These pyramids, smaller and narrower than their Egyptian counterparts, housed generations of kings and queens, carved with hieroglyphs and later a new script. Segment 7, Meroitic culture, language, art, and the voice of a nation. In Meroe, Kush began to speak in its own voice. Around the 2nd century BCE, scribes developed the Meroitic script, a unique writing system. Partially influenced by Egyptian hieroglyphs, but distinctly local, it came into forms, hieroglyphic and cursive, used for inscriptions and administrative records. To this day, much of the Meroitic language remains undeciphered. Though scholars can read the script phonetically, the meaning of most texts eludes translation. It is one of Africa's greatest linguistic mysteries, a civilization speaking to us across time in words we cannot yet fully understand. But we can still see what they valued. Meroitic art often depicted gods, animals, and kings in flowing motion, adorned with symbols of fertility, war, and cosmic balance. Women, too, played powerful roles not only as queens, but sometimes as ruling monarchs. Segment 8, the Kandake, warrior queens of Kush. One of the most remarkable features of Kushite society, particularly during the Meroitic period, was the prominence of royal women. Known as Kandake or Candace, these queen mothers or ruling queens were not mere consorts, but wielders of real power. The Greeks and Romans were astounded by them. One Kandake famously repelled an invasion by Alexander the Great's forces in Nubia. Another, like Amanirenas, led the resistance against Roman encroachment after Egypt was annexed by Augustus in 30 BCE. Roman records recount her as fierce, one-eyed, and utterly unbowed. She attacked Roman garrisons in southern Egypt, captured the city of Syene, and returned with spoils and statues. The Romans retaliated, but peace was eventually negotiated on favorable terms. The Candake had faced down an empire and won honor for her people. Segment 9. Trade and Faith, the lifeblood of Meroe. Meroe thrived not only because of its iron, but due to its central role in trans-African trade. Goods from the African interior ivory, gold, leopard skins, ostrich feathers, incense flowed through Meroe on their way to Egypt, the Mediterranean and beyond. Caravans and riverboats brought exotic animals, spices, and artworks to and from the city. Kush was not isolated, it was a conduit between worlds. Its religious life also reflected this bridge status. Temples were devoted to Amun, Isis, Apmak the lion-headed war god unique to Meroe, and to local spirits of the land and river. Apmak in particular symbolized the shift from Egyptian to indigenous focus. Depicted with a lion's head and a muscular human body, he was fierce and protective, a god of kings and warriors born of the savannah and the storm. Segment 10. The decline of Meroe, shifting sands of power. Even the most resilient empires falter, and by the 3rd century CE, the Kingdom of Kush began to weaken. The iron furnaces that had once roared in Meroe began to cool. Trade routes, once arteries of wealth, were disrupted as new powers emerged and old alliances eroded. Environmental degradation likely played a role. Centuries of deforestation to fuel iron smelting may have devastated the landscape. Fertile lands around the Nile became exhausted, and shifting rainfall patterns led to droughts and famines. Meroe's famed cattle herds declined. The soil, once the kingdom's greatest ally, turned against it. Political fragmentation also accelerated the decline. Local rulers grew more autonomous, and central control weakened. Internal strife and competition between rival elites destabilized the kingdom from within. Segment 11. Foreign pressures, Aksum, Rome, and the New World Order. While Meroe faced its internal challenges, outside forces were on the move. To the east, a new power was rising, the kingdom of Aksum in what is now Ethiopia. Militarily ambitious and economically potent, Aksum grew to dominate Red Sea trade. Its ships carried goods from Africa to India and Byzantium. Its armies, too, looked westward. According to inscriptions and archaeological records, Aksum invaded Kushite territory around 350 CE. The city of Meroe was either sacked or abandoned shortly after. While the precise details remain debated, it is clear that the once mighty kingdom could no longer resist its rivals. Rome and Egypt, too, had shifted its focus. The southern frontier was increasingly fortified, and relations with Kush grew more cautious. The once flowing corridor of trade and diplomacy began to close. Segment 12. Echoes and Legacies. What Kush left behind. Though the political structure of Kush disintegrated, its legacy echoed across centuries. The people, traditions, and cultural memory endured, resonating in the art and language of Nubian groups for generations. The Christian Nubian kingdoms of Nubia, Makuria, and Alodia that rose in later centuries inherited much from the Kushite past, from architectural forms to funerary practices. Kush had defied Egypt, ruled as pharaohs, founded a literary tradition, forged iron empires, and faced down Rome. It was one of the most enduring kingdoms of ancient Africa, lasting nearly 2,000 years. The pyramids of Nuri and Meroe still stand smaller than those of Giza, but more numerous, like stone needles piercing the Sudanese sky. Their hieroglyphs still speak of gods, kings, and queens. Their shadows fall on the desert in silence, but the stories they tell remain as powerful as the Nile itself. Segment 13. Rediscovery, the modern search for Kush. For much of modern history, Kush was overlooked, its ruins swallowed by desert winds and colonial indifference. But in the 19th and 20th centuries, European explorers and archaeologists began unearthing its story. The pyramids at Meroe astonished visitors. Inscriptions in unknown scripts stirred imaginations, and slowly, the pieces came together. Today, Sudan is home to more pyramids than Egypt, and scholars continue to study the Meroitic script, striving to understand a language that once rang out in temples and palaces. Museums in Khartoum, Berlin, and London preserve artifacts from this civilization, while efforts grow to return many items to their rightful home. But more than stones and relics, it is the narrative of Kush, the resilience, complexity, and pride that proclaims its place in world history. Segment 14. Reflections, Memory, and the Black Pharaohs. To call the Kushite rulers Black Pharaohs is both a recognition and a reckoning. For too long, Africa's role in shaping ancient history was marginalized or dismissed. The Kingdom of Kush challenges those old narratives. Here was an African civilization that matched Egypt in grandeur, that influenced and absorbed the cultures around it, that governed with queens and kings alike, and that stood proudly at the crossroads of history. Their memory, carved in stone, is not only African, it is human. It is the story of people who dared to shape the world around them, who believed in the divine order of the cosmos, and who built monuments meant to last forever. Segment 15. Queens of Power. The Kandake Dynasty. Among the most striking features of Kushite civilization was the prominence of its queens, especially during the Meroitic period, known by the title Kandake or Candace in Greco-Roman sources. These women were not mere consorts or regents, they were rulers in their own right. In some cases, they governed alongside kings. In others, they ruled alone with absolute authority. One of the most famous was Queen Amanirenas, who led a military resistance against Roman Egypt around 24 BCE. After Augustus annexed Egypt and established Roman control, tensions grew at the southern frontier. Amanirenas struck first, capturing the Roman garrison at Sion Modernus I and desecrating imperial statues. Rome retaliated, but despite their strength, they could not subdue Kush. A peace treaty was eventually signed that favored the Kushites. In an age when Rome dominated the Mediterranean world, a queen of Kush forced them to compromise. Her bravery, chronicled in Roman and Nubian records, became legend. Other powerful Kandakes followed. Amanishakheto, known for her wealth and massive pyramid, Shanik-Dakhet, one of the earliest female rulers of Meroe and Amanator, who presided over a period of great building and restoration. These women defy conventional narratives of ancient leadership. They wielded political, religious, and military power, and their memory remains etched in stone and legend. Segment 16. The Architecture of the Soul, Pyramids, Temples, and Tombs. Kushite architecture is one of the kingdom's most enduring legacies. At sites like Napata and Meroë, over 100 pyramids still rise from the desert floor. Though smaller and steeper than their Egyptian counterparts, these monuments were meticulously designed, often with east-facing entrances to greet the rising sun. Inside, burial chambers were painted with scenes of the afterlife, inscribed with prayers and protective spells. The fusion of Egyptian iconography with local motifs created a distinctive style, one that spoke of both spiritual continuity and cultural innovation. Temples were also built with grand colonnades, pylons, and sanctuaries. The Temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal, carved into a sacred mountain, became the heart of Kushite religious life. Its location, believed to be the dwelling place of the god Amun, was chosen not just for grandeur but for deep spiritual significance. These structures were not simply buildings, they were expressions of cosmology. They encoded the Kushite understanding of life, death, and the divine. They connected the physical world with the spiritual realm and linked rulers to gods and ancestors. Segment 17. Language and Identity. The Enigma of Meroitic Script. Among the mysteries of the Kingdom of Kush is its writing system Meroitic, developed around the 3rd century BCE. It was one of the earliest writing systems in sub-Saharan Africa. It came in two forms: a hieroglyphic version used for monumental inscriptions and a cursive script for writing on papyrus and pottery. Meroitic script remains only partially understood. Though the alphabet has been deciphered phonetically, the meanings of most words are still unknown. Scholars have yet to fully translate it, largely because no Rosetta Stone has been found linking Meroitic to a known language. Yet even without full translation, the script tells us much. Its very existence reflects a sophisticated society with administrative needs, religious texts, and historical records. It also marks a move toward cultural independence by creating their own writing system. The Kushites moved beyond Egyptian influence and articulated a uniquely Nubian identity. Segment 18, the spiritual world, gods, ancestors, and ritual. Religion infused every aspect of Kushite life. The pantheon was deeply rooted in Egyptian traditions but evolved in distinctive ways. Amun remained central, especially in Napata and later Meroe, but local deities also emerged like Apmak, the lion-headed god of war, fertility, and kingship. Unlike the Egyptian Horus, who was a falcon and a sky god, Apmak embodied ferocity and earthbound power. Temples dedicated to him, such as those at Musor Warati, Sufra, and Nokka, reveal his importance in Meroitic spirituality. Rituals were performed by priests and royal. Figures, offerings, processions, and oracle consultations were common. The king was both a political and spiritual intermediary, responsible for maintaining the cosmic order. Death was seen not as an end, but a journey. Elaborate burial practices aimed to equip the dead for the afterlife. Grave goods, spells, and pyramid tombs prepared the soul for judgment and rebirth. This spiritual framework gave meaning to life and power to kings. It connected the individual to the cosmos, the ruler to the gods, and the kingdom to the eternal. Segment 19, the river and the desert. Geography is destiny. The geography of Kush shaped its destiny in profound ways. The Nile River was its lifeblood, a highway of trade, agriculture, and communication. But unlike Egypt's broad floodplains, the Nubian Nile passed through narrow gorges and cataracts, creating both barriers and bastions. These natural features protected Kush from invaders and helped control trade routes. They also necessitated innovation. Terracing, irrigation, and canal systems were developed to harness the river's power. Its geography made it a crucible of cultural synthesis and survival. Segment 20, Decline and Legacy, Echoes in Stone and Memory. No civilization lasts forever. By the 4th century CE, the Kingdom of Kush began to wane. Several factors contributed to its decline: economic shifts, changing trade routes, environmental degradation, and external pressures from emerging powers such as the Aksumite Empire in the south. The final blow came around 350 CE, when the Aksumites rising from what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea launched a campaign that culminated in the sacking of Meroe. Though fragments of the Kushite world persisted in successor cultures, the once mighty kingdom faded from historical prominence, yet its echoes remain. The pyramids of Meroe still pierce the Sudanese sky, silent witnesses to an era of splendor and sovereignty. The Kandakes, those warrior queens, stand as icons of female leadership. The artistic and architectural innovations of Kush influenced later African and Mediterranean cultures, and the spirit of independence that defined the Kushites, especially in their resistance to Egypt and Rome, has inspired generations across the continent. In modern Sudan and Nubia, the descendants of Kush still live, farm, and tell stories beneath the gaze of their ancestors' stone monuments. The kingdom that once stood as a bridge between worlds continues to shape identities and reclaim its rightful place in the narrative of ancient greatness. A black pharaoh's gaze. We end our journey not in the chaos of conquest, but in the gaze of a black pharaoh. His statue battered by time, his features worn but noble. He looks not toward Egypt, nor toward Rome, but southward, into Africa. For too long, the story of Kush was told through foreign eyes. Now, we see it anew, a civilization that rose from African soil, shaped its destiny with brilliance and pride, and left behind a legacy no desert can bury. In the land of gold and granite, where lion gods roared and queens commanded armies, a kingdom thrived that was neither shadow nor echo. It was a voice clear, powerful and uniquely its own. Kush was never Egypt's imitation. It was Africa's proclamation, and it still speaks.